Okay, that's that. So now I can get rid of this, get rid of this. That might make things a little better. I need to open up my the Targum Sheni Patshegem Ktav. Oh, I don't understand that. Okay, never mind. Sorry. Worry about this. All right. So we finished last week. Basically, we finished that first verse in chapter 5, which were Esther has dressed herself in Malchut, whatever that means. I heard a very lovely Dvar Torah on that being dressed in Malchut refers to the big day kahuna. That we have a medrash that says, and we heard it back in chapter 1 a couple of years ago when we were doing that, that Achashverosh, when he dressed in Malchut for his big party, he wore the robes of the Kohen Gadol. And there's a medrash which is not referenced in our Targumei that says that Esther also, the royal ceremonial garb in Achashverosh's kingdom was this sense was made from the clothing of the Kohanim, but we didn't actually see that in the Targum. In the Targum, it described it as being made out of these clothes that had all this gold in them, and even gold shoes and ceremonial jewelry, etc. Anyway, she dressed and she appeared. And on her way there, she started to daven. Okay, so I'm supposed to be sharing my screen, but I don't think I actually am sharing my screen. So let me go ahead and do that. This is what I want to share. Say okay. Very good. All right. And so we are now starting with the second verse, and we're going to see do the Targum. It needs to be opened also. But this is Targum Rishon. The Tzvaria only has the one Targum, also called Targum Rishon, or just Targum Esther. And then we have that Targum Sheni that we've also been enjoying, which is a much later work. Okay, so the next verse is Vehi kir'ot hamelech et Esther Malka, as the king saw Esther the queen, omedet bechatzer, as she's standing in the courtyard. Nas'a chen be'einav, she found favor in his eyes. V'yoshet hamelech le'Esther et shavit zahav, And the king proffered, he held forth the golden scepter to Esther, Asher Biado, the one that was in his hand, V'tikrav Esther, and Esther came close, V'tigav, and she touched the head of this scepter. Targum Rishon is fairly straightforward, adds a little bit more detail there. V'hava kad chaza malka yat Esther malkata. It was as the king saw Esther the queen. Okay, it's the same thing that we have here. Kaima, standing. Kad nasisa bedarta, as she was like fainting away. This nasisa does not appear in the pasuk, but she's just had 3 days of fasting, so she's like at her last resources, right? The tartain enaha zalgan dimin, and both of her eyes, her two eyes, are like tears are just dripping out of her eyes. Umistakla klape shmaya, and she was looking up to heaven. Minyad, which is our word miyad in Hebrew, immediately. Atinat rachmin be'enoi, she immediately, there was this sense of rachmin, of love and mercy in his eyes for her. V'oshit malka le'Esther yat tigda d'dahava, and the king proffered, set forth towards Esther the golden scepter, dahava naket biyadeh, that he was grasping in his hand. Ukrivat Esther, and Esther came close. Umatat liada v'achidat beresha detigda, and she placed her hand toward that, and she grasped hold of the head of the scepter. Okay, so it added in this description of what Esther looked like. Why was it that she found chen in his eyes? And that's what got added. The description from Targum Rishon. In Targum Sheni, and I haven't paged through it yet. Oh dear. As you see, it had a problem, but now hopefully it will reload it. I don't want to edit it, actually. I just want to load it. Take this and move it over. It's cycling. Well, I thought it would do the cycling without me, without my sitting on the page watching it. I would let it do that, but I'm afraid that it won't. And so, excuse me. Okay, it's telling me it's on page 106, and of course I already read 2 pages of it, or even maybe 3 pages of it, so I have to wait until I'm done. It needs to load enough that I can get down and see the next pages. Page 2, page 3. I think it's either on the 3rd or the 4th page, but I need to wait and find it. Wow. I do not think there is anything else that I can just have to wait for this thing to load. Otherwise, I don't have the text. And I returned the Sefer. If you remember, this is the text that I had been using was from my friend's Mikro Kadola. I tell you what, while I'm waiting for that to load, I am going to pull the Sefer off the shelf, and so we don't waste any more time. I'm waiting for it to load. I'll read it. I'll try to find it and read it out of.
Maybe you have to reload it. That's nothing what shows.
Oh, no, now it says it's stopped again. It told me I had to reload before I hit reload, but it didn't actually come up. Wait a minute. Is it doing something or not?
No. Oh, yes.
Yes. Okay, here it is. Okay. Okay, this is still part of, okay, I actually don't need the third page. I need the fourth page. That's fine. Here we go. Because this is that prayer. This is more of the prayer. Here we are, all the way down here. Okay, as you see, it took parts of 3 different pages to do what we did last week, just that one verse. And now we're starting right here. I really don't want this in edit mode, but I'm not sure how to get it out of edit mode. So I just want it to be in view. Thank you. I'm viewing. Right. That's what I want to do. Hooray. Okay. Because now it's going to let me actually look at things and highlight. Well, not to highlight, but I can kind of point. Anyway. So this is in Targum Sheni. You see, it's very short, actually. After how expansive they were with the first verse, it's very short with the second verse. Esther, and it saw Esther the queen, Kaima Bedarata, standing in the Chatzer. And so it's this language of Gemul, which is interesting. But it's basically she found both Chen and Chesed before him in his eyes. V'kamu, but now they are going to add something that wasn't added in the other Targum and is not actually in the verse. V'kamu aspaklatore de Malka lemete lemiktoliat Esther, and the bodyguards of the king got up to go to kill Esther. Because remember, there's this rule that anybody who shows up uninvited to the king's courtyard is automatically put to death. Unless what? Unless the king holds forth the scepter. And he hasn't held forth the scepter just yet. And as soon as they see her, they're ready to go kill her because that's the rule. Okay. V'oshit malka le'Esther yat sharvita d'lahava, and the king holds forth to Esther the golden scepter, di b'yadei, which was in his hand. Ukrivat Esther, and Esther came close to Matarita, and she touches the head of the scepter. Okay. So each Targum adds in something that was important to them. Okay, they make a different emphasis as to what's going on in the story. Between the two of them, we have a more complete picture. Okay, so now I'm going to read the next several verses together, and then I'll do Targum Rishon, and then I'll do Targum Sheni. Together. Vayomer la hamelech, ma la Esther malka, uma bakashatech, ad chatzi hamalchut v'yinaten lach. And the king said to her, what's with you, Esther, the queen? And what are you requesting up until half of the kingdom, and it will be given to you? V'tomer Esther, im al hamelech tov, if feels right to the king, if it feels good to the king. Yavo hamelech v'Haman hayom el mishteh asher asiti lo. Let the king and Haman come today to the party, to the drinking party, as it were, that I have made for him. Okay. Now, take a look at that word lo and think about this sentence. Does the lo refer to the king? She's speaking very formally to the king. Let the king come to the party I've made for him. Oh, and let him bring along his best friend Haman as well. Or does the lo refer to Haman? And the king should come along as well, right? Because lo is singular and hamelech v'Haman is plural. Okay, so we're going to see that the two different Targumim are going to deal with the problem that's raised by just that lo. They're going to deal with it in different ways. Okay, Vayomer hamelech maharu et Haman la'asot et devar Esther. Vayavo hamelech v'Haman el mishteh asher asta Esther. And the king said, let them go hurry Haman up to do according to the word of Esther. And the king and Haman came to this drinking party that Esther made. And then again, the king says, Vayomer hamelech le'Esther b'mishteh yayin. And he says to her, now, the first time, let's take a look at the language so that we can sort of track it, and we can track it in the Targumei, because the Targumei, at least one of the Targumei, is going to deal with this language. The first time he says, malach, what's with you? What's your concern? Uma bakashatech, and what is your request? The second time at the party itself, he says, ma she'elatech. He doesn't say malach. He says, ma she'elatech v'yinaten lach. Okay, which is, and the v'yinat is what was said earlier. Right? Ma bakashatech v'yinaten lach. What is your request? It will be given to you. Here it's ma she'elatech v'yinaten lach. Uma bakashatech ad chatzia malchut v'te'as. And what is your request up until half of the kingdom, and it will be done. So what's the difference between it will be given to you and it will be done, like done according to your decree? All right? And then Esther is going to respond about she'elati ubakashi. Also doubles up that language. My question, that which I'm asking, and my request, a she'ela and a bakasha. All right, so let's at least see those psukim in Targum Rishon. So in Targum Rishon, I've got this thing cutting off half of my face. Let's try this. I think that looks a little better. Okay. So in Targum Rishon, we hear, V'amar la malka. And the king says to the queen, Ma tzroch itlich. What need do you have? That's that malach, right? Ma tzorach yeshlach be the Hebrew. And the Lashon HaKodesh just left out the tzorach and the yesh and made it short, which basically we say that all the time to people. Malach, what's with you? What's going on with you, right? So that's what he said to her. Esther Makta, Esther, the Queen Esther. Uma ba'utich, and what's your request, your bakasha? Afilu im ant ba'aya lafalgut malchuti et nina lich. Even if you were to request half of my kingdom, I would give it to you. L'chod, except, wait a minute, l'mivnei beit mukdasha de'ihu kayim betchum palgut malchuti la eten lich. Unless you were to ask for the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash, because that's in the half of the kingdom that I'm not going to give to you. Okay, I'll give you half of the kingdom, not the part that includes Eretz Yisrael. Okay. Dehechtan, because if I were to give it to you and you were to ask for that, hechtan kayamit b'shvuah, How would I be able to fulfill my vow? L'geshem arva'a v'sanbalat chorona'a v'tuvia avda amona. To these three people, there was the person named Geshem who was an Arab, Aravi, and Sanballat, who was a Chori. He was from the people. It was one of the 7 nations. Originally, one of the 7 nations of Canaan. Interesting that there were still people left around who identified themselves as that. And Tuvia Avda, okay, Tuvia Eved, or right, Oved, something like that, the Ammoni. Okay, and it's also interesting that at this time there were still people who were identifying themselves with Ammon, although to this day the capital of Jordan is called Rabat Ammon, and it's from this Ammon, because that was the place where the Ammonim lived. But really, they pretty much had exited from the world stage beforehand. So it's interesting that there are still people who are identifying themselves with those ancient nations. And he has a pact with them. And what's his pact? What vow did he make to these 3 people? Not to let it be them, it to be rebuilt, to build it, yate, right? Why? Because I'm afraid of those Jews. Dilma yimradun bi, lest they rebel against me. So, if that's your request, that I won't do for you. Any other thing that you ask of me, exhort v'titabid b'bhilu uritich it yahavlach lich. I keep wanting to be lach because that's how it would be in Hebrew, lich. Okay. But anything else that you request from me, I'll make a decree. It will be done quickly, and your desire will be given to you. All right. So he distinguishes between the malach and the ma bakashatech. And we also hear, of course, the Chazal piece of the story, which is, why does he say up to half the kingdom? Because he's not going to let her rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. And here it gives a sort of reason behind the scenes as to why he's not going to let her rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. Okay. And so what happened? Esther responds, V'amrat Esther in al Malka Shapir, if it's good for the king, if he likes the idea, Yete Malka Vahaman, Yom Adain, L'Sheruta Da'avadat L'chon. So the Esther says, if it feels right, let the king and Haman come in the plural, not in the singular, not Yavo, but Yete, which is plural. Yom Adain, today, the Sheruta. Instead, now we're going to see in the next sentence, they're going to call it a Mishtaya. Here it's a Sheruta and here it's a Mishtaya. Sheruta is a Su'uda. And a Mishtaya is specifically drinking. It's like come for cocktails. It's not a meal. Sheruta is a Su'uda, a full fancy, whatever, Su'uda. And the Mishtaya is it's a drinking. Let's get together and have some drinks. So the Targum goes back and forth between the words. The Lashon of the Megillah seems to stick with Mishteh, Mishteh, Mishteh. Okay, that the drinking is the main purpose here. And then also notice the avadat, to the meal, the avadat, interesting, avadat, not avadit, that either that was made or that she made. It could be that, or it could just be that I made it. The grammar is a little unclear for the Aramaic. and the Targum is not always consistent, which also makes it a little tough. But notice that it's not lo, it's not for him, where if it says for him, do I mean the king? Do I mean Haman? What is Esther trying to accomplish with the use of that pronoun? Here in the Targum, they say, let the king and Haman come to the party that I made, or that is made for you all, for plural you, okay, for both of you. So the Targum is ignoring this Targum, okay, Targum Rishon is ignoring the problem of that word lo, but it did deal already with the fact that the king keeps asking in doubled language, and so it dealt with the doubled language. Ba'amar Malka Ochiu, which is hurry him up. Yat Haman lemebad yat pitkam gzerat Esther, to do that which Esther has called for. Va'al, which is, and comes. This is it's not al like the preposition. It's this language of to come. The king and Haman came. L'mishtaya di avadat Esther. They came to the party. Now here it's the drinking party that Esther did. Notice this avadat is the same avadat that I have over here. And that's why this looks like, right, this is clearly third person that she made. And here, right, that she made for you. It's like she's the one who's speaking. Why isn't it that I made for you? But like I said, the grammar stuff in the Targumim, I've noticed, is sometimes a little shaky. They're not really, it's like nobody went through and edited this with Grammarly or the equivalent. Okay. All right. And they got there. And then what happens once they get there? Okay. So the king again asked her, Ma shalatek v'naten lak, ma bakashatek ad chatzi malkut v'te'as. And here we see the Targum is going to expand on that again. V'mar malka le'Esther b'mishtaya. And again, this is not specific. Well, here it's clearly it has to be a mishteh because it's mishteh yayin. Okay, it's a wine. We're not chugging beer, and we're not drinking cocktails. We're drinking wine. Okay, it's a wine drinking fast. Ma shalatech Esther makta uma ba'utich. What is your sheila and what is your request? Your bakasha. Afilu in ant, and again he repeats himself. But afilu in ant ba'aya ad palgud malchuti tit aved ba'utich. Even if you were to request up to half of my kingdom, it would be done. Your request would be done. Okay, that's the te'as. The language of Asiyah goes with bakasha. L'chod, except mivnei beit mukdasha, except for building the Beit HaMikdash. That's not happening. Di'u ka'im b'tchum palgut malchuti, because that's in the half of the kingdom that I'm going to retain for myself. La etenli, that I'm not going to give you. Dehektan kayamit, because if I were to do so, how would I be able to fulfill the shvuah legeshem arava sanbalat chorana to Avda Amona, to these three people, the Arab and the Chori and the Ammoni. Dela lemishbak, that I promised that I would not allow lemivne yate, for it to be built. Dilma Yimradun bi Yehudai, lest the Jews will rebel against me. It seems so interesting to me that the Targum is placing into Achashverosh's mouth this notion that the Jews are more likely to rebel if they have the Beit HaMikdash. I would have thought they're more likely to rebel because they don't have the Beit HaMikdash and they want the Beit HaMikdash. If you were to give them the Beit HaMikdash, it seems to me they should have such a karta tov that they would be like your best supporters. But he sees it opposite, and I'm not sure what's going on, why he sees the existence of the Beit HaMikdash as something that would encourage them to rebel. I have some ideas. One is that other nations don't have the same notion of gratitude that's sort of built into the notion of being a Yehudi, Hodaya. Okay. And so the notion that you would have gratitude to somebody who gave you your heart's desire, and therefore you would support them, is not necessarily taken for granted elsewhere. And so they don't really understand who we are is part of the issue. And that's one. And the other thing that occurs to me, this is just me talking, okay? I did not find it. There's no support really for what I'm saying in the rest of the Targum, as far as I know. Maybe if we listen to it, maybe you'll help me hear it, but I don't really hear it. And so the other piece that it's saying, or that I'm hearing about this, is that as long as we are dispersed and we don't have the center, we don't have the Beit HaMikdash to draw us all together and to unify us, we're likely to have more infighting or more whatever. We're not likely to rise up together as a unit to rebel. But that if we were to have the Beit HaMikdash, he's afraid that would give us sort of a political center that would cause us to want to rebel and want even more self-determination and sovereignty, etc. So those are the two partial answers that I have as to why they would think that having a Beit HaMikdash, why Achashverosh would think that having a Beit HaMikdash would cause us to rebel even more. To me, it didn't make sense. Okay. And I read at least one more verse. I want to actually do another two, and then I'm going to switch over and we're going to hear the same whole story all over again, but we're going to hear it from Targumei. But so the verse that I already read in the Megillah is this one: Va'ativat Esther va'amarit leit ana bar'aya palgut malchuta b'sheilati v'la binyan beit mukdasha b'va'uti. And Esther responded. This is the Aramaic. The equivalent in Hebrew would have been v'tashiv. She gave back an answer. She returned an answer, v'tashiv. In the actual Lashon HaKodesh, it's v'ta'an, which is similar, a note to answer. Esther answered, and she said, I am not requesting half of your kingdom as the thing that I'm asking. So she's using both languages, both the baya, which is the bakasha, ani lo mevakeshet et chatzi hamalchut b'sheilati. I'm not requesting half of the kingdom as that which I'm asking for. V'la binyan beit mukdasha b'ba'uti, nor is the building of the Beit HaMikdash my bakasha. So she's distinguishing between, becoming a co-ruler, having dominion, etc., political power. She's distinguishing between that and between the Beit HaMikdash. Whereas I'm not sure that he was really distinguishing them. He was holding them pretty much to be similar kinds of things. Okay. The last two psukim that we're going to do, or actually maybe we'll just do one more pasuk. I don't know if I'll actually get to verse 9. I'll hold that for a minute. Anyway, so Esther continues to respond, however. If I have found favor in the eyes of the king, and if the king thinks this is a good thing. L'tet et shelati, to give that which I'm asking. V'la'asot et bakashati, and to do that which I'm requesting. Notice again, there's this language of tinate, of being given and of doing. Okay. Yavo hamelech v'haman el hamishta asher eseh lahem. This time, Esther in the Megillah uses for them. Let the king and Haman come to the Mishta that I will make for them. Umachar, and tomorrow, and tomorrow I will do according to the word of the king. When I'll show you something that I didn't notice ever before in the Lashon HaKodesh, that I noticed. I don't remember if it was in this Targum or in the other Targum, but it's relatively short here, right? In Ashkachit, if I find Rachamim, okay, love or mercy, be'enei Malka, in the eyes of the king, ve'in al Malka yishpa, and if it will be good, if here the al, it's interesting. Here the al is probably the preposition, and like im al hamelech. Okay, if for the king it will be good. Yat limitan yat shelati, to give that which I'm asking, ulemed bad yat ba'uti, and to do that which I'm requesting. Ye'ul Malka v'Haman, let the king and Haman come, l'mishtaya, to the drinking festival. Again, notice the sheruta word is not being repeated in this. We're just hearing mishtaya from this point on. Di avid lahon, that I will make for them, baramsa, in the evening. Ulamachar ana avda kepitkam gzerat malka, and on the next day, tomorrow, I will do according to the word that the king has said. Now, what's really interesting to me about this is that the Targum picks up on this language in the Megillah. She asks them to come to this drinking fest that she's made for them. Presumably this is, I don't know, this is in the morning. When is this, right? It's after 3 days of fasting. So is it already in the evening, or is it in the morning? That the time of day that she goes, we haven't heard. Okay, it's at the end of 3 days of fasting, or is it on the third day of fasting, right? Because it was biyom hashlishi. That's not 100% clear. But they immediately go. They immediately go to the drinking fest, and that's fine. And so they immediately go, and he asks her again, and she says, let them come. And in the Aramaic, she says, let them come in the evening. As though we're now at a drinking fest that's like in the afternoon. And it's like, so go home and get cleaned up, and we'll have another party tonight. And then tomorrow, I'll do what you're asking, right? That's not what I wanted to have happen. Let me close that. Thank you. Okay, and if you look at the language in the Megillah, that's what it doesn't say evening. The word evening isn't there, but she says, let them come to the party I'm going to do for them, and tomorrow I will do. I always assumed that the party was also going to be tomorrow. And in the Targum, it sounds like there were two parties on the same day. And that the next day she was going to do according. So it's a diuk in the language. They're being precise with the language of the Megillah. Anyway, okay. So we're gonna hold it here. If I have time at the end, I'll come back. I'll start up again with Pasuk 9. All right. So that's the first Targum's take on it. It gives us an explanation of what's this business about half of the kingdom. It fixed up the question of the party that I made for him and made it the party I made for y'all. Okay, for you plural, so that we have no questions to what Esther's actually saying. And there's a fair amount of distinction between what's going to be given and what's going to be done and what cannot be done. The Targum Sheni starts here. Va'amar la Malka, and the king said to her, right, because that's where we're starting off the story. He speaks to her and he says, actually, are there words missing? And he says, Ma lich. Okay, he doesn't add in that word, ma tzroch itlich. What necessity do you have? What is it that brought you here? He just says malik, just the same way it does malach in the Lashon HaKodesh. Esther Malkata, Queen Esther. Uma be'utich, and what is your bakasha? Demin le-pagad malchuta ve'tenach, up until half of my kingdom, and I will give it to you. And it's also interesting because then I will give it to you, and this is the language both in Targum Rishon and in Targum Sheni, as opposed to the language in the Megillah is, and it will be given to you. Okay, in other words, it'll be done on its own, almost as though Achashverosh is as a bystander observing it, not doing it himself, which from a perspective of Hashkafa, of course, is true, because he doesn't have a whole lot to say about what's actually happening. Rather, he's as much of a bystander as everybody else is. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is pulling all the strings. Dalet. V'ka shamit Esther milaya ha'ilein itratta. And when Esther heard these words, she shook. Okay, retet is like retet. It's a kind of thing. Why should that make her shake? I'm not asking anything from you. Other than if it would be good, if Melech would feel good with this idea, Ye'ol Malka v'Haman, let the king and Haman come, Yom Adain, today, L'mishtaya da'avadit le, to the Mishta, and she uses Mishta, not Sheruta here, and then later she is going to use Sheruta. So it's interesting how the two different Targumim look at it. Straight off, it's a drinking thing, not a whole meal, right? But here it's clear, not to Avadat, but Avadit, that I made lay for him. So Targum Sheni leaves us with the ambiguity of which him did she make this party for? Va'amar Malka, Klon Yad Haman, call to Haman, V'sarhivu, and hurry him up, Yate. L'mebed Yad Pitkma de Esther, to do the word of Esther. Va'ata Malka v'Haman l'sheruta di avdat Esther, and the king and Haman came to now it's a sheruta, to the Suda that Esther had made. Va'amar Malka l'Esther, and the king said to Esther, right at this party, B'mashkaya dechamra, at this wine party. Here we go. Ma she'el tich Esther Malkta ve'etena. What is your question, Esther the Queen Esther? And I will give it to you. Uma ba'uti demin lepaga de malchuta va'abe. And what is your request? Up to half of my kingdom, and I will do it. I will cause it to be done. Va'abe. Okay, it's like the Hifil form here. I will cause it to be done. Va'anat, instead of the hey tiv, it's va'anat. It's the same language, but ya'an, like we had in the Megillah itself. And Esther answers, va'amarat, and she says, sheilati ubauti. And my question and my request, exactly, no, nothing's getting added in here, right? Whereas in Targum Rishon, we saw that there was an emphasis on the fact that the language was getting doubled and that one word meant one thing and one word meant the other thing, right? Here, it's leaving it with think up whatever backstory you want, but she's not putting it into express words in this text. Anat Malkta, the queen essentially raised her voice, Va'amarat, and she said, Ant Malka, you are the king. In Kadamach Malkata, if before you, O king, it is good. V'in ashkachit china v'chista ulachim kadamach. And if I have found chen and chesed and rachamim before you, v'in al malka shapir, and if it's really good, so tav and shapir are slightly different. You're the king, right? And if before you it is good, and if upon you it is good. So the two senses, if it appears to you, in terms of your intellect that this is a good thing, and if it is on you good, if the feeling of it, if it feels like the right thing to do, right? If it makes you feel good. V'in al malka shapir l'mitan yat shelati l'mebad yat b'uti, to give me that which I'm asking and to do that which I am requesting. Then yete malka v'haman l'sheruta, let the king and Haman come to this party, bid l'chon, that I will make for you all. Again, it's lachem, which that, by the way, was the language. Let me double check. I think that was the language there. I didn't point it out, but that was the language. No, the language in the Megillah is come to the party that I will make for them. Let the king and Haman come to the party that I will make for them. The language in Targum Rishon was also that I will make for them. It got rid of the problem of the singular. Even in the Megillah, here, unlike the first one where Targum Rishon changed it from lo to lachem, here when it was lahem, and lahem isn't so problematic, but here Esther is speaking more personally to the king, and so in the Targum here it says lachon, for you. Ulamachar avid ech miloid malka, and on the next day, tomorrow, I will do as the king has spoken. And now Targum Sheni is going to add in a whole bunch of stuff that was not in the original text. Therefore, 3 reasons, Esther invited Haman to this party. Pitgama kadma, the first reason. Didat Esther dechamat hektal Haman yad hata. Dahava halik b'shlichuta ben Esther l'Mordechai. That Esther knew how Haman, she'd seen how Haman had killed Hatach, who was Daniel, right? Who had been going back and forth on Shlichut between Esther and Mordechai. And so she knows that Haman is suspicious, could possibly be suspicious of her. Okay. She doesn't know whether Haman killed Hathach because Hathach was a Jew and he was just, or because Hathach was Daniel and had once upon a time had an important position at court and Haman was trying to get rid of all of his rivals, or whether it was because Hathach was speaking frequently with Mordechai, whom Haman felt was an enemy, or whether it was something that Haman was actually suspicious of her. She doesn't know. So she says, Amrat, she says, Azmin Yad Haman Lisharuta, I'll invite this Haman to the party. Mitul da'akor sina milibe, in order that I can uproot the hatred from his heart. He'll think I'm such a good friend because I'm inviting him to this royal party, and he will see that there's no reason to plot against me individually. All right. Pitkama tinyana, the second reason. V'tuv irme tinana ben Achashverosh lahaman. Furthermore, she was trying to arouse Anna. I'm not sure whether the word means sin'ah, hatred, but that's usually spelled with a samach, or whether it's kin'ah, and I'm not used to a tet kuf being a linguistic shift, but when I look it up in the dictionaries, they seem to think that this means kin'ah, means jealousy. She's trying to arouse jealousy between Achashverosh towards Haman. D'yemar Malka, that the king should say, Mahi hada milta, what is this thing that's going on here? Demikul hon shiltonai didi, that out of all of my, ministers and the viceroys, generals, etc. of mine, La karit Esther l'sheruta el Haman. Esther didn't call any of them to this party except for Haman, right? She didn't invite everybody of the top rank to make it, like a fancy party for everybody. She's only calling just this one. What's going on here? Okay. And so it's going to arouse jealousy by him. And pitgamet tlita'a. And the third reason, Amarat Esther, kulhon de Beit Yisrael enehon alai talia. Esther said, wow, all of Am Yisrael, their eyes are dependent on me. The Eve min Malka Achashverosh l'miktule lahaman, to see whether I will request from the king Achashverosh to kill Haman. Ella azmin yate l'shuruta, rather, instead of asking the king to kill Haman, which she could have done, right? He offered to do what she asked when she entered the court to be at the very beginning, right? Instead of asking him to kill Haman, I'm going to invite Haman to this party. And that's going to cause it's going to cause their hearts to turn over inside of them, of Beit Yisrael. Here they think, they figured out, oh, we've got the queen on our side. We have this secret weapon. It's all going to be good. And so they're counting on her. And then she invites Haman to the party. And they're like, oh my goodness, she's gone over to the dark side, right? And their hearts turn over inside of them. And what happens then? That v'nitpanin levat avuhon di b'shmaya, and so they're turned to their Father who is in heaven, because they have nowhere else to turn to. V'yivun rachmin mikadamoy, and they will request rachamim from before him. This is based, there's a Gemara on this, that these are the three reasons that are given. That Esther was trying to disarm Haman. That was the first reason. That Esther was trying to arouse jealousy by Achashverosh, and that Esther wanted to make sure that Am Yisrael understood that their salvation was only really going to come from Hashem, and they had to turn to Hashem to ask for it, and that if they would fully turn to Hashem to ask for it, and that the only way to get that to happen would be if she, if she set up the situation so that they gave up all hope of, it's like Mordechai had said to her earlier, if you don't do it, help will come to them mimakom acher, from another place. And Esther's like, they can't think that I'm the one who's doing it, because I'm not the one who's doing it. If it happens, it's only because of Hashem. But they have to come to the place of knowing that themselves. And so I have to take myself out of the picture for them. And so that's the third reason that is given. Okay, I do have, I started late. But so I can go on and I can do one more verse, or I can quit here. It's really up to you, Bat Shema'ira, because it's close to an hour. There's, I believe I've gotten through verse 8. There's 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. There are 6 verses left. It's not so much.
I have to leave now.
Okay, you also have to leave now. So
Yes.
We're going to call it quits here. Next week, we will finish chapter 5.
Next week, I will be in the air.
Okay, well, you'll have to catch it on the recording. And,
yes, I have to.
But for anybody else who's also catching this on the recording, we have one more week. We will be able to finish chapter 5, and then we will put the Megillah aside, because we'll be right up to Purim. We'll put the Megillah aside, and we will do chapters 6 and 7 next year, and we'll finish the Megillah the following year. It takes 5 years to get through all of them.
Yes.
They are really quite fun. Anyway, so Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov to you too.
And safe travels next week. Okay.
Amen. Bye.
Let me at least turn off the YouTube.